I died for 15 minutes. In that brief window of time, everything I thought I knew about life, faith, and eternity was shattered. What I saw, what I heard, and what I felt forever changed the way I see the world. And I promise you, once you hear this story, you will never look at life the same way again. My name is Claire Robbins. I was born and raised in Cedar Falls, a quiet little town nestled in the heart of North Carolina. Life there was simple: Sunday barbecues, high school football games, and neighbors who knew each other by name. My parents believed in God, but they weren't particularly religious. We went to church on Christmas and Easter, but for the rest of the year, faith was more of a cultural thing than a personal conviction. As I grew older, I became more curious about the deeper questions of life. I read books on philosophy, explored different religions, and even dabbled in meditation and mindfulness. I respected all beliefs and found beauty in many of them, but there was always one question that haunted me. Was Jesus really the Son of God, or was he just a wise teacher like Buddha or Confucius? That question lingered in the back of my mind like an unfinished sentence. No matter how much I read, how many churches I visited, or how many prayers I whispered into the dark, I couldn't find an answer that truly satisfied my soul. It was as if my heart was reaching for something just beyond my grasp. Then came the retreat. My best friend Jessica invited me to a weekend spiritual retreat in Asheville, a place known for its tranquil mountains and reflective atmosphere. The retreat promised peace, clarity, and a deeper connection to the divine, no matter what your faith background was. It sounded perfect for someone like me, someone searching but never quite finding. The weekend was filled with guided meditations, group discussions about divine energy, and workshops on the power of prayer. I listened. I reflected. I prayed. But as Sunday afternoon rolled around, I felt just as uncertain as when I had arrived. No revelation. No divine whisper. Just more questions echoing in the chambers of my mind. The drive home was quiet. The winding roads of the Blue Ridge Mountains stretched endlessly before me. The sun hung low, casting golden rays across the trees, painting everything with an almost ethereal glow. I gripped the steering wheel, frustration bubbling up inside me. God, I muttered under my breath, if you're real, if Jesus is really your son, show me. I don't want blind faith, I want truth. I didn't expect an answer, but sometimes answers come when you least expect them, and in ways you could never imagine. It happened in an instant. Out of nowhere, a truck swerved into my lane. There was no time to react, no time to scream, no time to pray. Just the blinding flash of headlights, the deafening crunch of metal. And then, nothing. Silence. Not the kind of silence you experience in an empty room, but a profound, otherworldly stillness. I was no longer in my car. I was no longer in pain. I was no longer in the world I had always known. And that's when everything changed. Before we continue, I have something special for you. We love building a community here, sharing stories that touch the heart and awaken the soul. If you're finding this story meaningful, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. It's more than just a button. It's a way to join a family of people seeking truth, hope, and deeper understanding. And there's more. We want to connect with you personally. If you want a special shout out in our next video, drop your name and city in the comments below. Imagine hearing your name shared with thousands of others. A little moment of recognition, a spark of connection in a world that often feels too vast. Let us celebrate you wherever you are in the world. I drifted in the stillness, weightless and unbound. There was no fear, no pain, no confusion, only an overwhelming sense of peace. It was as though I had been cradled in warmth, in love itself. At first, I couldn't comprehend what had happened. I remembered the blinding headlights, the violent impact, and then nothing. But now I was somewhere else. It wasn't darkness, nor was it light in the way I had always known it. It was something more, something alive. I became aware of a presence. It was not a voice, yet I understood. It was not a body, yet I felt its nearness. It was pure love, wrapping around me like the arms of a long-lost friend. And then, as though my eyes had adjusted to this new reality, I began to see. Before me stretched an expanse of radiance unlike anything on earth. It pulsed with colors beyond human comprehension, shifting, alive, singing in harmony. There was music, though not music as I had ever heard before. It was a chorus of voices, not in words but in pure emotion, a sound that resonated in my very soul. I looked down, or what I perceived as down, and saw the world I had left behind. My car was a crumpled wreck, emergency lights flashing, paramedics moving with urgency. I saw my own body, still and lifeless, and yet I felt no panic. It was as if I had stepped outside the confines of my human existence and into something greater, something eternal. Then I felt a gentle pull, not forcing me but inviting me forward. The light before me deepened, and out of it emerged figures. Beings of light, radiant and familiar. Though I had never seen them before, I knew them. They had always been with me. I recognized their love, their kindness. One of them stepped forward, its brilliance soft and welcoming. Without words it spoke to me. Come. I hesitated. Not because I feared, but because a part of me still clung to the world I had left behind. My family, my friends, would they understand? Would they know I was at peace? The being seemed to sense my thoughts. The light around me shifted, and suddenly I was no longer in the expanse. I was seeing moments of my life, each one playing out before me like a living memory. I saw my childhood, my mother holding me close as she whispered lullabies. I saw my father laughing as he taught me how to ride a bike. I saw the moments of kindness, of love, but also the moments of pain. The times I had hurt others, the regrets I had buried deep inside. And yet, there was no judgment. Only understanding. Each moment, even the smallest ones, had rippled outward, affecting the lives of those around me in ways I had never realized. The kindness I had once shown to a stranger had lifted them on a day they felt invisible. A simple act of forgiveness had released a chain of bitterness I had never known existed. Everything was connected, every action a thread woven into a tapestry beyond my comprehension. Tears welled within me, not of sorrow but of gratitude. I had spent so much of my life searching for meaning, questioning faith, doubting love. And here it was, in the purest form I had ever known. The being reached out, though it never truly touched me. Instead, warmth radiated through me, filling every part of my being with a love so profound, so absolute, that I could no longer hold back the tears. Then, just as I felt myself surrendering fully to this peace, the light shifted again. I turned, drawn by a presence greater than anything I had yet encountered. And in that moment, I knew I was standing before the one who had known me before I had ever taken my first breath. I fell to my knees, if such a thing was even possible in this place. Not out of fear, but because my soul trembled in awe. It was him, the source of all life, all love. The one I had questioned, the one I had doubted. And yet, despite my doubts, despite my fears, he had never left me. And then he spoke, not with words, but with truth that filled every fiber of my existence. You are known. You are loved. You are mine. At that moment, everything I had ever longed for, every question I had ever asked, every doubt that had ever haunted me, melted away. I was home. I was where I had always belonged. But just as I felt myself dissolving into this love, as I prepared to fully step into eternity, I heard another voice. A voice that pulled me back. Claire, come back to us. I resisted. I didn't want to leave. How could I return after experiencing something so beautiful, so real? But the voice grew stronger, calling me, urging me. And then, the radiant presence before me whispered one final truth into my soul. You must go back. There is more for you to do. In that instant, the light faded. The warmth withdrew. And I felt myself being pulled away, back into the world I had left behind. The next thing I knew, I was gasping for air, my body racked with pain. The sterile glow of hospital lights filled my vision, and the distant sound of a heart monitor echoed in my ears. I was alive, but I would never be the same. I was back. My body ached, my head throbbed, and the sterile scent of antiseptic filled my nostrils. The faint beeping of a heart monitor echoed in the background, grounding me in reality. I blinked against the harsh hospital lights, struggling to process what had just happened. The last thing I remembered was the overwhelming presence of light, love, and truth. I had been there, standing at the threshold of eternity, held in the embrace of something greater than I had ever imagined. But now I was here again in a broken body, surrounded by machines and wires. Why had I been sent back? I turned my head slightly, wincing at the pain that shot through me. My mother sat by my bedside, her hands clasped together as if in silent prayer. Her eyes, red-rimmed and filled with tears, locked onto mine the moment I stirred. Claire? She whispered, as if saying my name too loudly might break the fragile reality of my return. I swallowed, my throat dry and raw. Mom? She gasped, covering her mouth with her hands. The relief on her face was unmistakable. I had been gone 15 minutes without a heartbeat, and yet here I was, alive, breathing, and forever changed. The door to my hospital room burst open, and a nurse hurried in, followed by a doctor who stared at me with wide eyes, his disbelief apparent. This is impossible, he muttered, flipping through my charts. You were clinically dead. No pulse, no brain activity, and now you're awake, talking. I glanced at my mother, then back at the doctor. How could I possibly explain what I had seen? How could I put into words the love, the light, the truth I had encountered beyond this world? I cleared my throat, my voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't really gone. The doctor exchanged a glance with the nurse, skepticism flickering in his expression. Claire, do you remember what happened? I hesitated. How could I possibly make them understand? But the truth burned inside me, demanding to be spoken. I turned to my mother first. I was somewhere else, I said, my voice stronger now. I saw everything. The accident, the paramedics. But I wasn't in my body. I was above it. And then, I was taken somewhere else. The doctor frowned, and I could tell he was preparing to dismiss my words as the hallucinations of a dying brain. But my mother, she leaned in, her eyes filled with something deeper than skepticism. She wanted to believe me. What did you see, sweetheart? She asked gently. I took a shaky breath, closing my eyes for a moment. The memory was still vivid, more real than anything I had ever known. I saw the light, Mom. Not just light, but life itself. It was love, pure love. And there were beings there. They knew me. They welcomed me. Tears streamed down her face, but she said nothing, only nodding as if urging me to go on. And then, I stood before him. The room was silent. The doctor, the nurse, even the machine seemed to pause at my words. Before who? My mother finally asked, her voice barely audible. I turned my gaze toward her, and in that moment I knew. No fear, no hesitation, just truth. God. My mother sucked in a sharp breath, her fingers tightening around mine. The doctor shifted uncomfortably, but I didn't care. I needed to say it. I needed to tell them. He spoke to me, I continued. Not in words, but in truth that filled every part of me. He told me I was known, that I was loved, that I was his. The doctor sighed, shaking his head. Claire, when the brain lacks oxygen. No, I cut him off, surprising myself with the strength in my voice. This wasn't a hallucination. It wasn't a dream. It was more real than this. I gestured weakly to the hospital room, than anything I've ever known. The nurse, who had remained silent until now, took a step closer. Her expression was different. Not skeptical. Not dismissive. She looked curious. What else did he say? She asked softly. I swallowed hard, my heart pounding. He told me I had to come back. The nurse frowned. Why? I exhaled, feeling the weight of the truth settle over me. Because there's more to do. Because people need to know. Because he wants them to remember that they are loved, that they are never alone. The silence in the room was thick, charged with something unspoken. My mother wept silently, her lips moving in prayer. The doctor, though still skeptical, no longer argued. And the nurse, she simply nodded as if some part of her already understood. I looked at each of them, my voice steady now. I was sent back for a reason. And I won't waste a single moment. The days that followed my return from the brink of death felt surreal. I was back in the world, yet my heart carried the weight of eternity. The hospital became my temporary prison, doctors and nurses hovering over me, running tests, trying to understand how I had defied the laws of medicine. I barely spoke. How could I? How could I put into words something so profound, so beyond the limitations of human language? The truth wasn't something that could be measured by brain scans or explained through neurological theories. What I had experienced wasn't a hallucination or a product of oxygen deprivation. It was real. It was more real than anything I had ever known. My mother never left my side. She held my hand, whispered prayers, and cried quietly when she thought I was asleep. My father came and went, uncomfortable with the emotions he didn't know how to process. My siblings visited, bringing flowers and soft reassurances, but I saw the uncertainty in their eyes. They didn't understand. How could they? The first person who truly listened was a nurse named Rebecca. She was young, with kind eyes and a presence that radiated calm. One night, when the hospital had quieted and the halls were hushed, she sat beside me, her gaze filled with something deeper than curiosity. You saw something, didn't you? She asked gently. I hesitated, then nodded. I saw everything. She didn't scoff, didn't dismiss me the way the doctors had. Instead, she leaned in, waiting. Tell me. And so I did. I told her about the moment my soul left my body, about the radiant beings who had welcomed me, about the overwhelming love that filled every part of me. I told her about the presence, the one who knew me, who had always known me, the one who had sent me back. Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. I believe you, she whispered. I've heard stories like this before. Patients who were gone but came back, changed. Relief washed over me. Someone believed me. Someone understood. She wiped her tears and reached for my hand. You were sent back for a reason, Claire. Do you know what that reason is? I swallowed hard. To tell them. To remind them that they are seen, that they are loved, that they are not alone. Rebecca nodded. Then you need to do it. A knock on the door interrupted us. My doctor entered, his expression a mixture of concern and clinical detachment. Claire, we need to talk about your recovery. Rebecca gave my hand one last squeeze before excusing herself. I felt her absence immediately. Your vitals are strong, your tests are normal, the doctor said, flipping through my chart. Medically speaking, you should not be here. But you are. And we need to determine the next steps. I took a deep breath. I already know my next step. I need to leave. He frowned. Claire, you've been through severe trauma. You need rest, observation. I need to share what I saw. His face tightened. Claire, what you experienced was real. My voice was steady, unwavering. I know what you're going to say. Oxygen deprivation, brain hallucinations. But you weren't there. I was. And nothing in this world will ever convince me otherwise. Silence stretched between us. Finally, he sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. I can't explain what happened to you. But I can tell you this, you've been given another chance. Whatever it is you feel called to do, just don't let it consume you. I nodded, knowing that nothing could stop me now. The next morning I was discharged. My body was weak, but my spirit burned with a newfound fire. My mother drove me home in silence, sensing that I wasn't ready to talk. But as we pulled into our driveway, she reached over and squeezed my hand. Claire, she said softly, whatever happened to you, whatever you saw, I believe you. Tears welled in my eyes. Thank you. That night, as I lay in my own bed for the first time in what felt like eternity, I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer. Not out of fear, not out of desperation, but out of gratitude. I was back, and I would not waste a single moment. Life after death. Those words had always sounded like something from a distant sermon or a philosophical debate. But now it was my reality. I had been beyond, seen the truth, felt the overwhelming love, and now I was back. And the weight of that truth pressed on me with every waking moment. The first few days at home were strange. Everything felt different, yet nothing had changed. The walls of my childhood home still held the same framed photographs, the same scent of lavender from my mother's candles. The world moved on as if nothing had happened, but I couldn't see it the same way anymore. I woke up each morning with a sense of urgency. The message burned inside me. I needed to share what I had experienced, to tell people that this life wasn't the end, that they were seen, known, and deeply loved by the one who had created them. But how? My family was gentle with me, careful not to press too hard, but I could sense their unease. My father had always been pragmatic, grounded in the physical world. My mother was more open, but even she seemed hesitant when I spoke about what had happened. My brother and sister exchanged glances when I brought it up, as if they were deciding whether to entertain my words or dismiss them as delusions of a traumatized mind. Claire, my father finally said one evening over dinner, his voice even but careful. Maybe what you saw was your mind's way of coping. I set my fork down. Dad, I know what I saw. I know what I felt. I was there. I was with him. The room fell silent. My mother placed her hand over mine, her touch warm and familiar. We believe you, sweetheart. We don't know what it means. I sighed, pushing my plate away. It means that everything we've questioned, everything we've doubted, it's real. And I have to tell people. I have to let them know. That night, I sat on my bed, staring out the window at the endless sky. I felt so small beneath it, yet I knew I had been part of something infinite. I whispered into the darkness, "What now, God? What do I do?" The answer didn't come in a thunderous voice or an angelic vision. It came in a quiet stirring deep within me. I needed to start somewhere, anywhere. The next morning, I opened my laptop and started typing. I wrote everything. The accident, the moment my soul left my body, the journey into the light, and the presence that had known me beyond anything I could describe. Words poured out of me like a river, unfiltered and raw. When I finished, I stared at the screen. Would anyone believe me? Would they think I was crazy? I hesitated for a long time before finally clicking post. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly, messages started coming in. Some were skeptical, dismissing my experience as nothing more than a near-death hallucination. But others were desperate for hope. People who had lost loved ones, people who had feared what lay beyond this life, people who had been searching for answers they couldn't find in books or churches. One comment caught my eye. I've never heard someone describe it like this before, but something about it feels true. Like I've known it all along but just needed someone to remind me. I sat back, tears welling in my eyes. This was it. This was why I had been sent back. Not to convince the skeptics, but to reach those who were searching. The messages kept coming. Strangers pouring their hearts out, sharing their own experiences, their own losses, their own longing for something more. I responded to as many as I could, offering the only thing I had: hope. One evening, as I sat replying to messages, my mother knocked softly on my door. She hesitated before stepping inside. "I read what you wrote." I braced myself. "And?" She sat beside me, her eyes glistening. "I don't know how to explain it, but when I read your words, I felt something. Like a warmth in my chest. Like it wasn't just you speaking, it was something bigger." A lump formed in my throat. "Mom?" She took my hand. "Keep going. Don't stop." And I didn't. Day by day, word spread. People from all over reached out, sharing their own brushes with the divine, their fears, their hopes. My story wasn't just my own anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever longed for proof that they were loved beyond measure. But even as I found purpose in sharing my experience, I knew this was only the beginning. Because what I had seen, what I had been shown, it was more than just a message. It was a mission. And I was only just beginning to understand how much was still left to do. The messages didn't stop. Every day, more people reached out. Some in awe, some in skepticism, and others in desperation. They wanted to believe. They needed to believe. And I felt an overwhelming responsibility to be truthful, to be open, and to be fearless in sharing what I had experienced. I started receiving invitations. First, small gatherings in local churches and community centers. Then, radio interviews and podcasts. People wanted to hear the story, to see if the light I spoke of could somehow shine into their own lives. One evening, as I was preparing to speak at a small gathering in Raleigh, my mother entered my room, holding a folded piece of paper. Her expression was unreadable. "You got a letter?" she said, hesitating. I took it from her hands, the weight of the envelope somehow heavier than it should have been. As I unfolded it, my breath caught in my throat. It was from someone who had been in an accident similar to mine. Someone who had also been on the edge of life and death. I saw something too, the letter read. "But I've never told anyone. I was afraid people would think I was crazy. But when I read your story, I knew I wasn't alone." Tears blurred my vision. This was why I had come back. Not just to share what I had seen, but to remind others that they weren't alone in their own experiences. As I stepped onto the small stage that night, the room hushed. Faces filled with anticipation, with longing, with unspoken prayers. I took a deep breath. "I was sent back," I began. "And if you're here tonight, if you're listening to this, then maybe, just maybe, you were meant to hear it." The words flowed, not rehearsed, not scripted, but honest. I spoke of the love I had felt, the presence that had welcomed me, the undeniable truth that we are all seen and known. That life doesn't end when our bodies do. That the light is real. At the end of the night, people approached me one by one. Some hugged me, some wept, some simply squeezed my hand in silent gratitude. But all of them left changed, carrying a piece of the truth I had been given. As I packed up my things, my mother sat beside me, watching me carefully. "You're not just telling a story anymore, Claire," she said. "You're giving people hope." I nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle deep in my chest. Oh, that was it. That was what I had been sent back to do. The more I shared, the more the world seemed to open up before me. People from every walk of life reached out, sharing their own experiences, their own brushes with the divine. I quickly learned that I wasn't alone. There were countless others. Some who had seen the light but were too afraid to speak about it, others who had lost someone and longed for reassurance that they still existed somewhere beyond this world. The platform grew. The messages kept coming. And I found myself with an even greater responsibility to ensure that I was not just telling a story, but delivering a truth that could transform lives. One day, I received an email from a woman named Rachel. She had lost her son 2 years prior and had been drowning in grief ever since. Her message was short, simple. "I need to know if he's okay. Please tell me if the love you speak of is real." I sat with that message for a long time, staring at the screen, my heart aching for her. How could I give her the answer she so desperately needed? How could I make her see what I had seen? That night I prayed. I asked for guidance, for clarity, for the right words. And as I closed my eyes, I felt it again. The warmth, the love, the unmistakable presence of something far greater than myself. The next morning I wrote her back. I told her the truth. Love never dies. Your son is not gone. He is with the one who created him, and he is surrounded by more love than we could ever comprehend. Rachel responded with gratitude, and in her words, I saw what I had been sent back to do. Remind people that they are not alone. That life does not end when the body does. That there is something waiting beyond this world, something beautiful, something eternal. As my story spread, so did the opposition. Skeptics called me a liar. Scientists dismissed my experience as nothing more than a hallucination of a dying brain. But none of it shook me, because I knew the truth. And I knew that, for every doubter, there was someone out there who needed to hear what I had to say. One night, as I was preparing for another public talk, my mother sat beside me, her expression filled with concern. "Claire, are you sure you can handle this?" she asked. "The attention, the scrutiny, it's only going to get bigger." I looked at her, seeing the worry in her eyes. But I also saw something else: pride. "I have to, Mom," I said. "This isn't about me. It's about them. About the people who are searching." She nodded slowly. "Then you need to keep going. No matter what." And I did. Each time I spoke, I felt the presence of the one who had sent me back. Each time I shared my experience, I saw the hope reignite in someone's eyes. Each time I reminded someone that they were loved, I felt a sense of purpose deeper than anything I had ever known before. This was my mission. This was why I had been given a second chance. And I would not waste a single moment.